There are many Christians who have decided to homeschool their kids. Part of the reason is because they feel like homeschooling provides a superior way to educate their children. But there's also, at times, I find, a fear that characterizes the motivation for homeschooling, that parents are concerned what their students might be exposed to in a more traditional educational environment. One of the areas of concern has to do with science. Many Christians see science as being atheistic in orientation, and they don't want their students exposed to science, or they want to control how their students learn about science. Bijan, you're a physicist and you're a Christian, and I'm glad that you're here today because you can help maybe address parents and students who are involved in homeschooling when it comes to issues involving science. And you are particularly suited for this question because you have actually educated your kids at home, is that right?
That's
and
right.
Have been involved in teaching other homeschooled kids science. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, we some years ago now, because our children are mostly grown, decided we were going to try out homeschooling. And by and large, it has its challenges, but by and large, we're very glad that we did it. But I certainly, had to. There are certain parts of it where you really had to figure out how you're going to do some things that you normally would send off the kids to be taken care of. And so one of them is, of course, how do you do science? Now, in our home, I am a physicist. My wife studied zoology, so we had things mostly covered in the science area. But we also found ourselves in a community of Christian homeschoolers in various cities that we've lived, each case where, that may not be the training of the parents. And then the question is, what do you do? And often what parents do is you can get either a curriculum that basically is very much carries all the load, or you can do cooperatives, and the cooperatives often include people who have had some science training who can do those. So we found that part worked fine, basically, in terms of just the mechanics of how do you go about doing this. It's a good time to be doing homeschooling just because of the richness of the curriculum material that's out there for teaching science. In my case, also what I did, which was a little bit more than average, was I taught a physics course for high school students. And we really went all out. We had very fancy experiments, and was a lot of fun to do it. So I did that, I think, 2 different years in the past 10 years.
Now, what are some maybe concepts or principles that you could communicate to parents and to students in general about science faith issues, particularly in a homeschool environment?
Yeah, one thing is that I guess we have to be careful about is that we in a typical case, you hear about your faith at home and at church. You hear about science sometimes through the media, sometimes through documentaries. Sometimes, if you're not homeschooling, you're in public school. You hear it at the public school, of course. And what we find is that sometimes these things look like they're separate from each other, so that some kids will have the perception that their faith is unscientific, and some kids will have the perception that the science is ungodly. That they're either one, one doesn't match the criteria of the other. And of course, as Christians, what we have to remember is that God is the God of all truth, that is all one coherent understanding, so that the interpretation is something we have to be careful, but the description of science, we can really pretty much use the description as it comes, most of the times without too much trouble. It is important to have a proper foundation, as philosophical and theological foundation for the way you do science. But homeschoolers can do that. So definitely do not avoid science. It is a way of seeing God's glory. It is really part of our calling. It is what Christians invented, after all, in many cases, in many fields of science. So it's very much the Christian's business to be engaged in science and learning of science. Be not afraid of it, and just apply yourself to it, and use good materials. And there are good materials out there.